So not too long ago, I learned this crazy trick from a rich guy who told me, Tommy, if you want to ensure that you actually get good service, here's a little trick you actually do when you go to a restaurant to make sure you actually get great service. And the answer is, okay, the word tip, TIP, it actually means to ensure prompt service, okay? So what you do is, when you actually arrive at the restaurant, you actually give that person your tip first before you actually do anything else, okay? Now, what does that mean, okay? Usually, we go to a restaurant, we get everything we want to, and based on that person's performance, we actually tip them. If they do a great job, we tip them good. If they didn't do a good job, we might not even tip them in the first place, okay? But if you actually go ahead and tip them, that actually ensures prompt service. And you might say, Tommy, but doesn't that mean that that employee isn't really going to be performing because they already got the tip? The answer is no. If somebody already got money for something they have not done yet, usually that is going to motivate them to actually want to perform, okay? Now, that's just a fun fact, okay? But for this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why I stopped tipping in some places, okay? Now, I cannot go anywhere, whether it's to get ice cream, whether it's to get, for example, a fast food burger, whether it's, for example, me being at a tourist local keychain shop where I basically go myself, get the keychain, and those people are actually expecting me to give them a tip for actually processing the transaction and taking my money from me, okay? Some things just absolutely make no sense. So we have this whole problem in the US where tipping is actually getting out of control. It kind of started in the pandemic, you know, when the pandemic was happening, people didn't really have jobs like that. And when people were actually doing deliveries and so on, everyone was expecting a tip and people actually tipped, okay? Now that's great stuff. But now all of a sudden, everyone wants a tip. And I'm not a fan of it, okay? I'm not a fan of it in totality. So in this video, we're going to cover that. As always, guys, do me a favor and smash the like button in this video. Now, the very first thing, guys, is that there is a legitimate thing called, for example, underpayment. You know, some people actually get paid below minimum wage. You know, usually this is going to be, for example, restaurant waiters. These kids, people, adults, they actually get paid below minimum wage. And most of their profits come from tips. And that's how restaurant owners get away with not paying them, for example, minimum wage. Because basically, they make more money from tips and so on. So you get like a base salary, like a base wage, but then most of the profits come from tips and so on. So these people, based on their service, they do expect a tip to actually cover the difference, and you should give them a tip, okay? Because it's actually a part of the whole thing. However, though, okay, here's something that people don't understand. It's not a popular opinion, but I'm still gonna say it because I really don't care. And the answer is, okay, if you are getting paid minimum wage, that is your wage. And whether that's, for example, a lot to you or not enough for you, then it still is your wage. And in reality, you are not supposed to really like expect a tip whatsoever. So for example, if I'm at McDonald's and the minimum wage is, for example, like 15 bucks an hour, like in New York, the federal wage is like $7.25. So I know it differs by states, but New York is around $15 an hour. And, you know, if I'm there and I'm basically just taking orders and so on, I'm not supposed to be like, oh, you should tip me, okay, because I don't make a lot of money. The answer is no, that's what you make based on the job you're actually doing. And you're actually not really doing like a service job where you're performing greatly. Like you really can't take an order that great, right? And like I'm just making an example here. So you shouldn't really be expecting a tip whatsoever. So some jobs, physically, mentally, like financially, they do expect a tip and you should give them a tip. But overall, some jobs like it's just minimum wage, and just because you make minimum wage doesn't mean you should be required to actually tip that person whatsoever. Now, if you want to, there is nothing wrong with that, okay? Now, here's my little rule, guys. When I go, for example, to a restaurant, and by the way, here in Dominican Republic is a lot more different because, for example, if I go to a restaurant and let's say I spend $100, by the way, I don't, but I'm just saying $100 like for a round number, you know, automatically we get taxed like 18%. So that's like $18 right there. And we also have, for example, a mandatory tip, okay, and that's 10%. And on top of that, so far, okay, we just went from $100 to $128. And on top of that, then that waiter might also be expecting a tip. But again, don't ever forget, a tip is optional, and don't let anybody guilt you into having to tip the amounts they actually have in their brains or whatever the culture is actually telling you. So whenever I tip, I always tip the amount I want to tip, and I feel comfortable in tipping, because in reality it really wouldn't be genuine. So for me, that's usually like 15% or so, and depending on what they're actually doing and so on, I might just tip, for example, a fixed dollar amount, maybe less than 15%, sometimes even more than 50%. Okay, it just depends. Okay, and I really like this Bible verse, which basically says, 2 Corinthians 9 verse 6 to 8. It says, each of you should give what you have decided to give in your heart. And you know, one of the most craziest thing is, like, whenever you have to give something and you really don't want to give it, it's not genuine whatsoever, and it's not really like a like it might be a good amount, but it really doesn't really mean much if you really didn't mean it. Okay, and that kind of sounds perplexing or so, but it is true. So whatever the amount I give is a genuine amount that I feel comfortable giving, and I don't have to have second thoughts about it. Okay, and by the way, it's not like to say like, oh, I want to go to a restaurant and, you know, I only have $20, so I can't tip somebody 25%. So I'm just gonna wait until I have enough to like actually tip that person that much. Like, no, you can still go to a restaurant, and then if you don't have enough to tip that much that day, guess what? You can just come back when you do, and maybe you don't have that much money. Okay, my point is, okay, don't let the culture, don't let people, their opinions tell you exactly how much you're actually supposed to tip. Okay. Now, here's the second part I actually don't like about this whole tip culture thing. You guys know when you go, for example, get some ice cream, and there's this person with like a little iPad, a little kiosk here, and it's usually like Squarespace or whatever the feature is or the company actually is, and it says, for example, hey, tip 15%, 20%, or 25%, okay? And this guy automatically, or girl, automatically goes ahead and basically flips it over to you and says, hey, how much do you want to tip? You know, sometimes you click zero, sometimes you click whatever. You know that feature? It can actually be disabled, and the amounts are actually set by the owner. And in reality, you know, people actually go about it two ways. And by the way, I'm not saying asking for a tip is bad in a sense, but I am saying, for example, you know, requesting a tip and expecting a tip for a service that really doesn't deserve it. This is kind of crazy, right? So overall, when you go to one of these places, just remember they usually have these like guilt tactics and kind of like social pressures to actually get you to take action. And you know, that's going to be, for example, let's say there's a line, usually there is a line, right? And you're in this line, and then this guy goes ahead and basically flips it over to you and says, hey, tip whatever you want, right? And then right there, people are watching you. So if you don't tip, you kind of feel like, oh man, I'm gonna be like a bad person or whatever. You're not. And sometimes there's another type of person behind that like table or whatever, and they're basically saying, you know what? They don't even flip it over to you. They say, hey, how much do you want to tip? Right? So that's kind of like a verbal question. Say, well, what's that? All questions are verbal, right? But you know, it's like a verbal question to say like, hey, you know, now you have to aloud say, I don't want to tip. Or you have to aloud say in front of everybody exactly the amount you actually want to tip, right? And at that point, you might not want to be tipping a low amount because you might feel embarrassed or whatever, okay? And here's a crazy story where I kind of was just like, yo, it's kind of crazy. People are kind of going mad about this stuff. But there was this guy, and he was going on this date with this girl, right? It was like a first date type thing, I think so. And, you know, he was trying to like kind of like show off or whatever. And he went on this first date, and the girl basically made him spend about like 99% of all the money he had in cash because he did not have his cards on him. So automatically when this happens, what's left is basically change at this restaurant, right? So he basically leaves the change because that's all he basically has. And the waiter, literally when he sees the change, he calls him and says, hey, come here, come here, come here. Just to basically try to embarrass him in front of that lady to say, hey, this is what you left me. You can have it back. Take your change with you, okay? That's just kind of crazy. And in my opinion, let me know what you think though, right? In my opinion, I just think it's kind of like wild to be, for example, somebody left you, like whether it's $1 or 50 cents or $3 or $5 or like a 10% tip or a 5% tip. Like, you don't know if that's all the money that that person had, and that's what they're basically giving you, okay? It's not like, for example, you go to a restaurant and you say, you know what, I'm not gonna order this just so I have enough for the tip, because at the end of the day, you're actually there to buy something. You're still paying your money for something, right? So to me, that's just like a crazy expectation type thing. So again, guilt and manipulation tactics and social cues and all the stuff plays a role. So what's my overall like perspective here and my conclusion in this video? My overall idea, guys, is there's nothing wrong with tipping, you know. And there's nothing wrong with tipping people like in different types of jobs or whatever, not just like restaurants and service jobs. Like if you want to tip somebody because they did a great job overall, like I remember like tipping people that were like a plumber because I just felt like, yo, you did such a great job here. Like I just want to give you a little bit more money because you actually earned it, okay? And that's awesome. That's fine, okay? Although it's not the normal thing to actually do. But I do think when you actually mix in, for example, social pressures and so on, and people like have these expectations and so on, then that's when it becomes a problem for me. And whenever people, you know, you really want to be careful with this, okay? Because if you do have jobs that are not like tipping more or whatever, and a lot of the profits are coming from tips and they're actually able to track it via the software, well, in reality, maybe we might reach a point where those same businesses might be required or may be able to lower your minimum wage and say, hey, you make money from tips, so why do I have to pay you minimum wage? Okay, that's also a possibility to actually keep in mind, okay? And the idea that just because you make minimum wage, you deserve tips, that's not true. Minimum wage is what you deserve to make because you're having that skill, and that's what that skill is basically worth at that moment, okay? But guys, as always, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified. And when you tip, give the amount you're actually comfortable with, and that's just my common rule. But thanks for watching, guys. As always, like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified. Up here is another video. And as always, Long Term Team officially out.